In the Kubernetes lab, we are going to deploy the model that we have created using the Google Kubernetes engine on the GCP. Firstly, to start with, we are going to create a Google Kubernetes engine cluster. So we'll create a cluster. We have the two options of the autopilot and the standard. For now, we are going to choose the standard cluster and we are going to configure it. The name of the cluster can be anything of your wish, and the zone also can be the same. But for now, I'm choosing the zone of US East 1B. And I'm leaving everything to be the same. And you also have the option to configure the number of the nodes that are required. It can be 3 or 1. For now I'm choosing 1, which means that there is only one master node. And also I can also configure the mission depending upon the type that is required, like number of CPUs and the memory that is required for each node that I'm creating, and also the boot size that is required. So for now I have created a default pool with 3 nodes and the configuration to be E2 medium and the boot size to be 100. For our lab purpose, I have created a cluster before, which is the MLOps cluster, since it takes a significant amount of time of 20 minutes to create the cluster. And the next step is going to be creating an artifact registry repository in order to build and push the images of our Python application. I'm naming the repository to be kuberepo, and the format has to be Docker, and everything remains the same. And the region, I'm choosing it to be US East 1 just to match with my cluster region. And I'm leaving everything to be the same, and I'm creating the cluster, the repository. So once that repository is done, we need to create a Python application where I have created a simple Python application which just gives the Kubernetes lab once the URL endpoint is hit. And for the same, I have written a Docker file, and this is the Docker file that I have written. And now the next step would be creating the manifest. So for the Kubernetes deployment, we'll be creating a manifest for the deployment, so which will be based on the rolling updates, where we use this strategy to replace the old versions with the with the newer versions, so that there would be uninterrupted availability during the updates. And once that is deployed, we create a horizontal autopod scaler that just basically scales up the number of pod replicas in the deployment when there is a demand on the workload. Then we follow up by the configuring the services, which is basically exposing the endpoint for our model using this YAML file. And then we'll implement the persistent storage, because there can be cases where the pods in the Kubernetes can be stopped and started at any time. But in a scenario where a pod dies, the data stored on the file system can be lost. In order to make the pods durable for the storage and make them consistent regardless of the cycle, we implement the persistent storage. So now the order of the execution is going to be setting up the GKE cluster and also the repository. And now we are going to authenticate into a Gcloud first, which will be, Gcloud auth login. So I'm going to authenticate my account here. Yeah, once I'm authenticated, I'm going to push the build the image first and put it into the repository, that is the kube repository that I have created. I'm using this particular command in order to build the image, and you have to change the project ID and also the artifact repository that you guys are going to create. So with this command, I'm going to build the image first. Okay, once that's done, I'm going to create push the image that has been created now. Yeah, so now once the image has been pushed, we can verify it into the artifacts. So we'll get into the kube repo, and here in the kube we can find the image with the tag of the v1 for which we have given. Now following up the execution, first we need to mount the persistent volume and the volume claim. So for that we'll use these commands, but before that we need to connect our terminal to the Google Kubernetes engine. To do so, we need to use this command: gcloud components install gke gcloud auth plugin. So it says all the components are up to date. If you don't get this message as all components are up to date, and you'll be just given a command of like choosing why or no. So you can just give the S command, then you'll get activated. Once that is done, we are going to connect our cluster, the MLOps cluster, to the terminal point. So using this, once you are inside your cluster, you'll get the option of the connect, and I'm giving the command that I'm getting over here into my terminal. And it says the Kubernetes have been configured to this MLOps cluster right now. Now, from the README file, I'm going to follow the sequence of commands. So first, the storage, then the PVC, then the pods. With that being done, I'm going to deploy my model. Before deploying the model, in the deployment.yaml, we need to change the image over here according to your repository, whatever is being generated. For that, I'm going to get inside my image and copy this path. I'm going to paste it over here. I'm using this. Yeah. With that being done, my deployment.yaml file is perfect. And you also guys have to change the project ID and also the artifact repository name over here. So now I'm deploying it. The deployment is created. Once the deployment is created, I'm going to expose the endpoint now using the service.yaml. Now I have exposed it up, and now I'm implementing the auto scaling. Even that has been created. Now if I want to see the endpoint, I'm going into my cluster and into the workloads, where I can see the MLOps deployment. Once I'm inside that, yeah, this is the endpoint that has been created for our model. So I'm going to hit this endpoint. Once I hit this, it's going to show me Kubernetes lab. In the same way, I can also get this endpoint using this command, Kubernetes get services. So once I give that, I'm going to get the external IPs for the MLOps service, which is like a load balancer. In the same way, I can also get the deployment status from here. It says everything is ready and up to date, and some other information about this. And this is the Kubernetes deployment.